Welcome to Istanbul, in Turkey, for Europe District, our magazine on EU enlargement. Straddling the continents of Europe and Asia, this vast country of 74 million people started negotiations with Brussels in 2005. But as we find out, 8 years later, the talks are completely deadlocked. Turkey's pride is wounded as it feels rejected by a number of countries, including France. Meanwhile, the European Union has become more and more critical of the ruling AK party of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Brussels says it's turning increasingly authoritarian and religious. But we also find a very confident country with a booming economy and a new diplomacy. We'll travel to the border with Syria, where the situation is very difficult for over 100,000 refugees. And finally, we'll show you the many delights of Istanbul. But let's move to our first story. Each year on November 10th, the country celebrates the memory of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of modern and secular Turkey. But as our reporters find out, a number of people here in Turkey suspect the ruling AK party of Recep Tayyip Erdogan of having a religious agenda.
As always on November 10th, Ulku's in a rush. It's 7 a.m. as we leave Istanbul's Asian side. Ulku was born 3 months after the death of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Ulku's parents named her after Atatürk's adopted daughter. For 15 years now, these two friends have gathered to pay tribute to the man credited with founding the Turkish Republic.
My father was born a slave, but he died a citizen. I was born a citizen, and I will die as a citizen of the Republic of Turkey, with my head held high.
On arrival at the Dolmabahce Palace, the crowd thickens. Many here are critical of Recep Tayyip Erdogan's ruling Islamist-rooted AK party, saying the secularism so dear to Atatürk has taken a step backwards.
You know, I'm not moved because he's dead. Everyone dies. I'm crying because I see what Turkey's become, that Turkey's no longer worthy of him.
Gulizar, meanwhile, stayed on the other side of the Bosphorus. She only moved to Istanbul 2 years ago, having grown up in a farming community. Gulizar's a practicing Muslim and says she's still attached to the religious tradition she grew up with.
I cannot go out without my headscarf. I've worn it since I was little. When I put it on, people call me an extremist, but it has nothing to do with extremism.
Gulizar hadn't planned on attending a memorial. Yet as she crosses Atatürk Square around 9 a.m, she asks us to stop there. Very quickly, the crowd single her out for wearing an Islamic headscarf.
It doesn't matter whether you're for Ataturk or the AKP. Don't come here wearing your headscarf.
How is it possible to be so disrespectful? Ataturk hasn't been created just for them. It was created for everyone.
The scene is emblematic of the growing gulf between practicing Muslims and secular Turks, the rift exacerbated by AKP Prime Minister Erdogan's political and economic success. This year, the army, once considered the guardian of Turkish secularism, for the first time agreed to attend Atatürk Day celebrations alongside the veiled wives of Turkish leaders. At 9:05, the time of Atatürk's death, the sirens wail. Turkey grinds to a halt.
I feel like I've been born again. It would be nice if every day was like this.
I feel so emotional right now. If you ask me how I feel, I can't give a simple answer. I think in today's Turkey, we're not worthy of the legacy Atatürk left us.
Ulku's angry about the Prime Minister's wish to create Turkey's first religious generation. Erdogan's introduced religious education in schools and lifted the ban on Islamic headscarves in universities.
I'm not against people veiling their hair, but I am against using the headscarf as a political symbol. Religion cannot organize our lives. If it begins to do that, then development stops.
Regarding the role of religion in public life, philosophy professor Ulku and farm girl Gulizar are for once in agreement.
If Ataturk saw this, he'd be angry. He'd be disgusted if he saw in whose hands he's left Turkey. Personally, it disgusts me. Between whose hands is Turkey? The AKP are religious. They all want women to wear headscarves.
Turkish opposition parties and the army, weakened by almost a decade of AKP rule, accuse the ruling party of whittling away Ataturk's legacy. November 10th allows Turks to reflect on the country's secularist tradition.
The latest EU report on Turkey is very critical when it comes to the freedom of speech, freedom of expression in this country. The trial and detention of a number of journalists, activists, but also students has raised serious concerns. Julie Dungeloff brought us this report.
21-year-old Sevil Sevilmi originally came to Turkey for a year-long university exchange. Then in May, 15 police investigators knocked on the door of her flat share. The Franco-Turkish student would spend 3 months in jail. According to Turkish NGOs, some 700 students are currently detained in the country's prisons.
They searched everything. They threw all of my documents, notes, books, and DVDs on the floor. They asked whether they constituted evidence that I belonged to an armed far-left movement. Then they took me to the police station. It all happened very quickly. The next morning, we were in court facing the prosecutor. They said we were under arrest for terrorism, for preparing attacks. There was no attack under preparation. I don't even have weapons.
Sevil was accused of participating in a demonstration on Labour Day, attending a leftist rock concert, and owning magazines criticising the government. Her trial's been postponed until January. She says she feels pessimistic about the outcome.
I can't really feel confident, because if they arrested me for that, there's no way the trial can proceed in a normal way.
An anti-terror law passed in 2006 outlawed many seemingly innocent actions. Emma Sinclair Webb of Human Rights Watch said freedom of expression is on the decline in Turkey.
One of the biggest misuses law has been the misuse of terrorism laws. Basically, at the moment in Turkey, we have around 9,000 people in prison for terrorism offences. And many of those people have attended demonstrations, have been involved in political activity, but have not committed any act that could be described as terrorism in international law.
There are currently more journalists imprisoned in Turkey than in China or Iran. Kagdas was one of them. He spent 9 months in prison, accused of leading a banned Kurdish activist group. The journalist convinced that in reality his articles had riled the Turkish government.
When I was in custody, police told me about the articles I had written about them. They asked me why I was so harsh with them. And honestly, I think that is why I was arrested.
Kagdas was imprisoned last December. He only learned of the charges he faced in May.
The thing that shocked me the most in these accusations is that I was accused of participating in political meetings in northern Iraq. But on these dates, I was studying in the US. My passport proves this. It was only after 9 months in prison they finally checked my documents and released me.
And still, Kagdas was forced to appear in court. We head to Silivri for the trial. 43 other journalists are also in the dock, all of them facing between 15 and 30 years behind bars for alleged ties with the Kurdish Workers' Party, considered a terror group both by Ankara and by the EU. Kagdas's lawyer says freedom of the press in Turkey is coming under attack.
Journalists are detained and tried simply for doing their job. In any democratic country, this would not be acceptable.
Artists, too, have suffered censorship. Internationally renowned pianist Fasil Say found himself accused of blasphemy and violating religious values after posting messages on Twitter in which he claimed to be an atheist. For that, Say faces 1 year in jail. Brussels says freedom of expression remains a major sticking point in Turkey's bid for EU membership.
And for more on the story, I'm glad to be joined by Turkey's European Affairs Minister, Egemen Bosch. Mr. Bosch, thank you for having us here at your office in Istanbul. There are actually now more journalists detained in Turkey than in China or Iran. How do you explain this situation?
Almost none of those journalists are detained or arrested because of their journalistic activities. Some have been accused by independent prosecutors to support PKK terrorist organization. Some of them actually were caught while trying to rob a bank. There are among them who have killed individuals and have been found guilty by the courts. So being a member of media does not give immunity to journalists in Turkey. I don't know about your country, but if you commit a crime in Turkey, you are prosecuted.
When you look at the report, though, the vast majority of these journalists were writing on the Kurdish issue. Is it to say that writing on the Kurdish issue is a crime in your country?
If you can prove to me that any one of them were detained or arrested just because they wrote on the Kurdish issue, I will fight for them personally. But writing to show PKK terrorist organization as a rightful political movement, as a movement that has the right to kill innocent soldiers, innocent citizens, innocent women, innocent children, that doesn't go with my conscience.
What about the legacy of Atatürk, secularism in your country now? Your Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, once said, for the first time in modern history, we will raise a religious generation. Does it mean that it's the end of secularism?
It's not the end of secularism. What he meant by that statement was a generation that has respect for other people's values, that has respect for the traditional values of this country. But we're not forcing anyone to become religious. We have not changed anyone's lifestyle. We have not even attempted to do anything of that sort in this country. And we have been in power for more than 10 years now. What we're trying to do in Turkey is to protect secularism, because we see secularism as a guardian for people to practice a religion or not to practice a religion. It's up to them.
A couple of months ago, your Prime Minister gave Europe a sort of deadline. He said if by 2023 Turkey isn't in the EU, Europe will have lost Turkey forever. How realistic is this prospect?
I think we should have become a member already yesterday. I think waiting for another 10 years is too long. Today, when you look at some of the member states, Turkey is much more European than some of the current member states. And today, with everything happening in the Middle East, in the Caucasus, in Central Asia, Turkey can help turn the grandest peace project of the history of mankind from being a continental project to a global project. The most important obstacle between Turkey and her rightful membership to European Union is prejudice. All we have to do is fight with prejudice.
Egemen Bayış, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And I'm back in the vibrant center of Istanbul. The Turkish economy grew by more than 8% in 2010-2011. Not bad for a country that was once a byword for crisis. But figures for this year show the economy is running out of steam. It's partly a consequence of the euro crisis. So now the government is looking east. It wants to stake its future growth on exports to the Middle East.
On the outskirts of Istanbul, Vedat Yilmaz Türk is getting his hands dirty. The company boss sprays a non-stick coating onto these hot plates. Launched only 2 years ago, his firm already has a turnover of 5 million euros.
We work on a just-in-time basis for the group bakery. The idea is to meet customer orders and not let useless stock accumulate.
With the 16th biggest economy in the world, Turkey's eager to flaunt the strength of its businesses. Bosses like Vedat are brimming with confidence.
Before, companies were like birds without wings. Now they've learned to fly. Today you can see Turkey's place in the global economic landscape through its foreign trade figures and exports.
Despite earning double the Turkish minimum wage, Vedat's staff are far more competitive than workers in the European Union. With Europe blighted by the economic crisis, the business boss says he sees no advantage in his country joining the EU.
It's not for us that it would be worthwhile, but for the rest of Europe. For us, there's no real advantage in working with EU member states because we've managed to access other markets with our exports.
The EU still buys 40% of Turkish exports, yet like many other Turkish businessmen, Vedat's turned his attention to emerging markets in Africa, the Middle East and the former Soviet Union.
Little by little, Turkey is developing another vision of its future, both politically and economically. This involves styling itself as a regional player that has equally good relationships with Europe as it does with other regional and international centres.
Tigdem Akea moved to Germany aged 17. She spent 24 years there, completing her studies and becoming a university researcher. Yet gradually she grew weary of having to explain her identity.
For 15 years, I was constantly back and forth between the two countries. I worked on issues considered negative by the European public, such as why Muslims and Turks apparently don't integrate. After 15 years, I'd had enough of the whole debate. I was tired of dealing with it and tired of the general climate.
Tigdem returned to Istanbul in 2004. She now runs a company that helps German businesses invest in Turkey. The EU, providing 2/3 of foreign investment, remains Ankara's #1 business partner. Despite the lure of Turkish growth, Tigdem's worried that the economy's foundations could yet prove shaky.
There's a lot of development, as if there were no crisis. Many things are growing thanks to consumption, but this brings with it debt. These debts will one day have to be paid back, so it would seem Turkey's living beyond its means.
Yet for now, Turkey remains an attractive option for foreign workers and investors alike. Tigdem has even created a page on internet social networks aimed at people recently arrived from Germany. Every day, 5 new people sign up.
I'm here in the Galata district in the heart of Istanbul. It's already the end of the first part of Europe district, but we'll return after the news break and we'll continue our journey across Turkey.